The wind swept across the dry plains of New Mexico territory, carrying dust and the faint echo of wagon wheels fading in the distance. It was the spring of 1886, and a young woman named Clara Whitmore stood alone beside a small trunk, her heart heavy and her dress powdered with dust. She had come a long way from Boston, answering an advertisement from a widowed rancher seeking a mail-order bride. The promise of a new beginning, of a husband and a home, had kept her courage alive through the endless miles of prairie and the whispering fears of the unknown West. But when she arrived at the ranch marked Jonas Hale, cattle and horses for sale, she found only silence. The corral gate hung broken, the barn door flapped in the wind, and the house, if it could be called that, was empty. Dust coated the floors and the hearth was long cold. Her heart sank as realization struck. She had been abandoned. For days Clara waited, convincing herself there must be some mistake. Perhaps her would-be husband had gone to town. Perhaps he'd fallen ill. But each dawn brought only the same lonely wind, the same emptiness. The stagecoach driver who'd dropped her off had long since gone back to the nearest settlement, 40 miles east, and she had no horse, no food beyond a few biscuits, and no idea how to survive in the harsh frontier. On the third day, a thunderstorm rolled over the horizon, thick and black as ink. Clara scrambled to take shelter in the barn, clutching her small Bible and whispering prayers between tears. The rain lashed the plains, turning dust to mud, and lightning illuminated her frightened face. She felt utterly forsaken by the man who had promised her a home, and perhaps by God himself. But that night a light appeared through the rain. A lantern glow swaying gently, moving closer. Clara pressed herself against the barn wall, heart pounding. The door creaked open, and in stepped a tall man in a soaked hat and oilskin coat. His eyes met hers with a mix of surprise and concern. "Ma'am," he said, voice low and rough. "What in God's name are you doing out here?" His name was Luke Carson, a cowboy from the next ranch over, an honest man, quiet and strong, who kept mostly to himself. He'd come to check on his neighbor's place, having noticed the smokeless chimney and the silence where there was usually activity. Finding a lone woman trembling in the dark barn was the last thing he expected. Clara explained everything, her journey, the letters, the promise of marriage. She showed him the yellowed page of newspaper where Jonas Hale's advertisement had been printed. Luke frowned as he read it, the rain dripping from his hat brim. "Jonas Hale's been gone near 6 months," he said quietly. "Sold his herd, packed up, and headed north. Ain't nobody heard from him since." The words hit Clara like a bullet. 6 months. All that hope, all that risk, built on a lie. When the storm calmed, Luke offered her a place to stay for the night at his cabin. "You can't stay here," he said firmly. "This place ain't safe for a lady alone. Come on, my place is just a mile yonder. You'll have a dry bed and a hot meal." Clara hesitated, fear mingling with gratitude. She didn't know this man. But his eyes held no deception, only concern, and in that moment, trust was all she had left. She nodded. They rode through the muddy plains on Luke's horse, a chestnut gelding named Rusty, and reached his cabin as dawn broke over the horizon. Smoke rose from his chimney, and the scent of coffee and bacon filled the air as he kindled a fire. His home was simple but clean, a sturdy log cabin with a small kitchen, a single bedroom, and shelves lined with well-worn books and tools. It was the home of a man who valued work and solitude. Clara sat at the rough-hewn table, shivering in her damp dress. Luke poured her coffee, then busied himself at the stove, giving her space. When she finally found her voice, she whispered, "I don't know what I'll do now." Luke looked at her with quiet sympathy. "You'll rest first," he said. "Then we'll figure the rest later." That morning, for the first time in weeks, Clara slept without fear. She awoke to sunlight streaming through the cabin window and the smell of pine wood smoke. The loneliness that had haunted her since Boston eased a little. There was something about this place, its simplicity, its warmth, that made her feel safe. As days passed, Clara helped with small chores around the cabin, cooking, mending, sweeping. Luke, though reserved, began to speak more each evening as they shared supper. He told her about life on the frontier, about how he'd lost his family to fever years ago, and how he'd built his cabin with his own 2 hands. There was a quiet strength in his words, a humility that touched Clara deeply. In turn, she spoke of her life in the city, the gray streets, the loneliness, the disappointment of men who promised love but sought only convenience. Out here, far from society's judgments, she felt seen for the first time. Still, the shadow of her past lingered. "I was supposed to be someone's wife," she murmured one night. "And now I'm nothing." Luke set down his coffee and looked at her. "You ain't nothing, Miss Whitmore. You survived a journey most folks wouldn't dare take. You've got more grit than half the men I know." His words warmed her like the fire itself. That spring, the land around the cabin came alive. Wildflowers colored the meadows, and the sound of cattle echoed faintly from distant ranches. Clara began to laugh again, softly at first, then freely. She and Luke rode together to the creek, mended fences, and shared quiet moments as the sun dipped low over the hills. The bond between them grew, unspoken but undeniable. One evening, while gathering firewood, Luke found Clara standing by the corral, staring at the sunset. The sky burned orange and gold, and her hair glowed in the light like spun copper. "Luke," she said softly, "do you think God brings people together for reasons we don't understand?" He studied her for a long moment before answering. "Reckon he does. Sometimes he closes one door just to lead us to the right one." Their eyes met. And in that silence, something passed between them, tender and sure. Clara had come west to find a husband, but what she found instead was love, unexpected and genuine. The kind born not from letters or promises, but from shared hardship and quiet kindness. That night, as the coyotes howled in the distance and the stars spread like a silver river overhead, Luke added another log to the fire and said, almost shyly, "You can stay here as long as you need. Clara, ain't no rush, but I'd be mighty grateful if you chose to stay for good." Clara looked at him, her heart steady now. "I think I already have," she said. Outside, the wind softened and the world felt new again. The weeks following Clara's arrival at Luke Carson's cabin changed both of their lives in quiet, unexpected ways. What began as an act of kindness, sheltering a stranded woman, slowly turned into a rhythm of shared days, laughter, and a growing connection that neither could have foreseen. Luke's cabin sat nestled near the foothills of a low ridge, where a small creek wound through a cluster of cottonwoods. The sound of running water filled the air, and birds often perched on the fence posts while the breeze carried the scent of pine and sage. It was a humble place, one room for sleeping, another for living and cooking. But every board, every nail spoke of Luke's hard work and solitude. Before Clara came, the silence had been his only companion. Now that same space was filled with the rustle of skirts, the soft hum of a woman's voice, and the aroma of bread baking over the hearth. At first, both were careful, respectful of the boundaries that decency and caution demanded. Clara still carried the ache of betrayal. Luke, the quiet grief of a man who'd buried too much of his heart long ago. But life on the frontier doesn't allow time for long silences. There were fences to mend, animals to feed, water to haul, and food to gather. Each day's labor pulled them closer. Clara insisted on helping. "You've taken me in, Mr. Carson," she said one morning, rolling up her sleeves. "The least I can do is earn my keep." Luke smiled faintly. "You already do, Miss Whitmore. But I won't stand in your way." She learned to milk the cow, collect eggs, and patch Luke's work shirts with neat, practiced stitches. The calluses began to form on her once delicate hands, but she didn't mind. There was a strange satisfaction in it, working with purpose, seeing the results of her own effort. In Boston, her life had been shaped by expectation and rules. Out here, the frontier asked nothing but honesty and strength. Luke often found himself watching her without meaning to. The way she pushed a strand of hair behind her ear, or how she smiled when Rusty, his old horse, nuzzled her palm. She brought a kind of light into the cabin that had been missing for years. One afternoon, they rode out together to check the grazing cattle. The sky stretched endlessly above them, and the sun cast long shadows over the grasslands. Clara rode side saddle on Rusty while Luke rode his black gelding Crow. The ride was quiet, peaceful, until the sudden crack of thunder startled the horses. The scent of rain filled the air. "We'd better head back," Luke said, urging his horse forward. But before they could reach the ridge, the heavens opened. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking them through. Clara laughed, a pure, unrestrained sound that startled Luke almost as much as the storm. When they finally reached the cabin, drenched and laughing, Clara's dress clung to her and her cheeks glowed pink from the cold. Luke quickly built up the fire. "Get close to the hearth," he said gruffly, handing her a wool blanket. "You'll catch your death of cold." As she wrapped herself in it, she glanced at him and smiled. You worry too much, Mr. Carson. He met her gaze and for the first time couldn't look away. Something in her eyes, soft, bright, alive, made him feel young again. It had been years since anyone had smiled at him like that. From that day forward, the air between them changed. It wasn't spoken of, but it lingered in the way she poured his coffee in the morning, or how he lingered at the table just to listen to her hum while she worked. Sometimes he'd catch her staring at him when she thought he wasn't looking, studying his face, weathered and lined from sun and years of solitude. As summer settled in, Clara began tending a small garden near the cabin. She planted beans, onions, and wild herbs she found by the creek. Luke helped her build a fence to keep the deer out, and when the first sprouts appeared, she clapped her hands in delight. "Look," she said, kneeling beside the green shoots. "Life does grow out here after all." Luke knelt beside her, brushing dirt from his palms. "Told you the land just needs a little care. Same goes for folks, I reckon." Clara smiled, her eyes glistening in the sunlight. "Maybe you're right." The days grew warmer, and with them came a comfort neither had known before. On Sundays, when the chores were done, Luke would take his guitar from its case and play on the porch while Clara embroidered or read aloud from her Bible. The sound drifted over the hills, carried by the evening wind. Sometimes, when the stars began to appear, they'd sit together in silence, watching the sky turn violet and silver. But not every day was gentle. One night, a pack of coyotes drew near, drawn by the scent of the chickens. Luke grabbed his rifle and stepped outside. Clara followed him to the door, heart racing. He fired once into the air, shouting, and the coyotes scattered. But the danger reminded her just how wild and untamed this place still was. When he came back inside, she threw her arms around him before she could think. "I thought they'd come for you," she whispered. He hesitated only a moment before wrapping his arms around her. "Ain't nothing out there gonna get me, Clara," he said softly. "Not while you're waiting inside." That night, neither of them spoke of what had passed between them, but both felt it. The fragile line between gratitude and love had begun to blur. Weeks later, the harvest moon rose over the plains. Clara baked a pie from the wild apples she'd gathered and set it on the table. Luke came in from the barn, dusting off his hat. "Smells like heaven," he said. Smiling, she handed him a plate and said, "You've been good to me. Luke, I don't know how to thank you." He leaned against the table, looking at her with quiet seriousness. "You already have." Silence fell, heavy but tender. He reached out, brushing his thumb over her cheek, rough calluses against soft skin. Her breath caught. "Clara," he began, then stopped as if the words were too fragile to speak. She took his hand and placed it over her heart. "You don't have to say it," she whispered. "I know." And then, under the low hum of the fire and the creak of the cabin walls, he kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost uncertain, then deepened, an expression of all the loneliness and hope that had brought them to this place. When they finally parted, Clara's eyes shone with tears. "I never thought I'd find love out here," she said softly. "Not after everything." Luke smiled faintly. "Reckon love finds us when we stop looking for it." From that night on, the cabin was no longer just Luke's. It was theirs. They worked side by side, built new fences, and made plans for winter. For the first time in years, Luke felt the emptiness inside him fill with something solid and real. And Clara, once a forgotten mail-order bride, had found not just shelter, but a home built on quiet devotion and shared dreams. As autumn painted the prairie gold, Luke built a second room onto the cabin. He did it without a word of explanation, but Clara knew. It wasn't just a cabin anymore. It was the start of a life they were building together, plank by plank, heart by heart. Autumn came early that year. The wind turned sharp across the plains, and the leaves around the creek shifted to golden rust. Luke and Clara had settled into a peaceful rhythm, quiet mornings with coffee and sunrise, long afternoons tending to chores, and evenings spent by the fire, reading or simply sitting close. Life was steady and good, built on trust, gratitude, and a love that neither had planned but both had come to depend on. But peace on the frontier was fragile. It could shatter as easily as a bottle on a saloon floor. And one afternoon, that truth came riding up the dusty trail toward Luke Carson's cabin. It began like any other day. Clara was on the porch shelling beans into a tin bowl, her hair tied back with a faded ribbon. Luke was splitting logs near the barn. Rusty and Crow grazed nearby, tails swishing lazily. The air was calm until the distant sound of hooves broke it, a steady rhythm growing louder, closer. Luke paused mid-swing, his instincts flaring. He wiped sweat from his brow and squinted down the trail. A man was riding toward them, alone, hunched in the saddle, leading a pack horse behind him. His coat was dust-stained, his hat low over his face. There was something in his gait that spoke not of a traveler passing through, but a man coming with purpose. Clara looked up at the sound. When her eyes fell on the stranger, the bowl slipped from her hands, scattering beans across the porch. "Luke," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's him." Luke's grip tightened on the axe handle. "Who?" "The man who sent for me," she said. "Jonas Hale." The name hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Luke set the axe aside and walked toward the porch, placing himself slightly in front of Clara. Jonas reined in his horse and dismounted slowly. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face half hidden by an unkempt beard. His eyes, though, were sharp, too sharp. A man used to getting what he wanted. "Afternoon," Jonas said, tipping his hat toward Clara with a half-smile. "I see you found yourself a comfortable place while I was gone." Clara's breath caught. "Gone? You left me there, Jonas. You sold your ranch and vanished." He shrugged, feigning indifference. "Had some business up north. Didn't figure you'd get here that soon. Stage schedules change." His tone was casual, but there was something dark behind it. "Heard you been keeping company with my neighbor. That true?" Luke's voice was calm but cold. "You got no claim here, Hale. You abandoned her." Jonas laughed, though there was no humor in it. "Claim? She's my wife-to-be by contract. I sent for her, paid her passage. She came to marry me. I came for a promise," Clara said firmly, her voice steadying. "A promise you broke," Jonas's eyes narrowed. "You think you can just take what's mine, Carson?" "I don't reckon the law looks kindly on that." Luke's jaw clenched. "You left her to die out there. That's what the law would care about." The air between them crackled with tension. Clara's heart pounded as the two men stood facing each other, two lives colliding over her fate. Jonas spat into the dirt. "You always thought you were better'n me, didn't you, Luke? Always playing the honest man. Well, I aim to take back what's mine and I don't need your permission." Luke didn't move. "You ain't taking nobody." Jonas's hand drifted toward his belt, brushing the grip of his revolver. Clara gasped. "Please, no," she cried, stepping between them. The moment froze. Two men, one woman, and the unspoken code of the West where pride and love so often met the barrel of a gun. Jonas's hand hovered an inch above the holster. Luke's eyes never left him. "You draw," he said evenly, "and you won't be riding home." Jonas's jaw twitched. Then slowly he dropped his hand, exhaling through his nose. "You ain't worth the bullet," he muttered. "But this ain't over." He turned, mounted his horse, and rode off, his figure shrinking into the horizon. The sound of hooves faded, leaving behind only the restless wind. Clara sank to her knees, shaking. Luke knelt beside her and pulled her close. "He's gone," he said softly. "You're safe." But deep down, he knew Jonas Hale was not the kind of man to let go of what he considered his. That night, Luke sat on the porch, rifle across his lap, watching the darkness. The stars glittered coldly overhead. Inside, Clara lay awake, listening to the soft creak of the rocking chair and the distant howl of coyotes. Her past, the one she thought she'd left behind, had come riding back, and with it came danger. The next morning, Luke found hoof prints near the creek. Fresh ones. Someone had been watching the cabin from the trees. He didn't tell Clara right away. He didn't want to scare her. But when she came outside, she saw the look in his eyes and knew. "He's out there, isn't he?" she asked quietly. Luke nodded. "Reckon he's trying to spook us." Clara placed her hand over his. "He can't take what doesn't belong to him, Luke, not anymore." For the next several days, they lived on edge. Luke kept his rifle close and the horses saddled. He set lanterns by the windows at night and took turns keeping watch. Clara tried to stay calm, but every rustle in the dark made her heart leap. Then, one evening, while Luke was mending the fence line, Jonas returned, this time with a bottle in hand and fury in his eyes. He staggered toward the cabin, shouting her name. "Clara, you're my wife. You made a vow when you answered that letter." Luke stepped out, gun in hand. "That's enough, Hale. Turn around and leave before I make you." Jonas laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think you can take her from me? You think you can steal my life and sleep easy?" He raised his pistol, but he was too slow. Luke's shot rang out first, striking the ground near his boots, close enough to send dirt flying into his face. "Next one won't miss," Luke said, voice low and steady. "Now get on your horse and ride till you can't see this place again." Jonas glared at them both, hate burning in his eyes. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "You both will." He holstered his gun, mounted, and rode off into the night, his shadow swallowed by the dark horizon. When the sound finally faded, Clara turned to Luke, tears glistening in her eyes. "He'll come back," she whispered. "Maybe," Luke said quietly. "But if he does, he won't find the same man waiting." He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've got me now, Clara, and I'll stand between you and the world if I have to." For the first time, she believed him. She leaned against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the rhythm of strength, of love, of home. That night, as the fire flickered and the wind howled outside, Clara prayed not for the fear to go away, but for the courage to face it. Because she knew now that the frontier was not just a place of survival. It was a place where hearts were tested, where love had to be earned through storm and danger. And though Jonas Hale was gone for now, both she and Luke knew the story wasn't finished. Somewhere out there, vengeance was brewing, and it would come riding back before winter's first snow. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough. Winter came down from the northern hills like a slow-moving tide, heavy and merciless. The sky turned gray, the grass died under the frost, and the wind howled through the cottonwoods like an old ghost mourning the sun. For Luke Carson and Clara Whitmore, the quiet cabin that had once felt like a haven of peace was now a fortress against both the cold and the danger that still lingered beyond the horizon. It had been nearly a month since Jonas Hale's last visit, but his shadow remained. Luke hadn't forgotten the look in the man's eyes that night, the hate, the pride, the promise of revenge. In the West, a man's word, even when bitter, carried weight, and so Luke prepared quietly but thoroughly. He mended the barn door, stocked firewood higher than the eaves, and made sure every rifle and pistol in the cabin was oiled and ready. Clara helped him without complaint, though sometimes, when she looked toward the distant ridge, her eyes filled with unease. One morning, as snow began to fall, she stood at the window watching the white flakes settle on the frozen earth. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "And yet, it feels like the world's holding its breath." Luke set down the bucket he'd been carrying and joined her. "Winter does that," he said softly. "Makes a person feel small. But we'll get through it, like everything else." She nodded, leaning her head on his shoulder. That simple gesture, so quiet, so full of trust, gave him strength. It reminded him why he fought, why he worked, why he stayed alive in this hard country. Clara had become his reason. The first heavy snow arrived 2 weeks later. It blanketed the plains, sealing the world in silence. Days shortened, nights stretched endlessly, and the temperature dropped so low that even the creek froze into glass. The cabin walls creaked in the wind, and the only warmth came from the fire that Luke kept burning around the clock. Life became a rhythm of survival. Each morning, Luke broke the ice on the troughs, fed the livestock, and checked the traps near the creek. Clara tended to the fire, cooked what little they had, and mended clothes by the flickering lamplight. At night, they sat together by the hearth, the fire painting soft gold on their faces. Sometimes Luke read aloud from one of his few books, tales of courage and endurance that seemed fitting for their own lives. Sometimes they just sat in silence, the kind that needs no words. Yet beneath that peace, both carried unspoken worry. Luke often stepped outside after dark, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The snow muffled sound, but it also hid tracks, the perfect cover for a man like Jonas Hale if he ever chose to return. One night, Clara followed him quietly to the porch. "You still think about him," she said softly. Luke didn't deny it. "Men like that don't just disappear. He's out there somewhere, maybe waiting for the thaw." Clara stepped closer, her shawl pulled tight around her. "Then let him wait," she said. "I'm not running again, Luke, not this time." He turned to her then, cupping her face in his rough hands. "You ain't gotta be afraid, Clara. I won't let him hurt you." She smiled faintly, her breath misting in the cold air. "I'm not afraid," she whispered. "Not when you're near." He kissed her then. A deep, quiet kiss that carried all the promises he didn't know how to speak. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless, as if the world itself had decided to keep them safe for a while longer. The middle of winter tested them hardest. Food ran low, The storm shutters froze shut, and the wind beat against the cabin like fists. For days they could barely see beyond the window pane. Yet in that isolation their love only deepened. Clara sang to pass the time, old songs from her childhood, hymns and lullabies that reminded them both there was still light in the world. Luke built small wooden toys and carved shapes for her from the leftover wood, rough but made with care. One morning Clara woke to find him gone from the bed. Panic seized her until she saw him returning through the white blur outside, dragging the carcass of a deer behind him. His face was red from the cold, his beard frosted with ice, but his eyes still burned with quiet determination. "You're mad to go out in this weather," she scolded as he came in. Stamping snow from his boots, he grinned faintly. "Maybe, but you deserve better than dried beans and salt pork for Christmas." Her eyes softened. "You remembered?" "Course I did," he said. "Ain't much out here worth celebrating, but we got each other. That's enough reason for a feast." That night they roasted venison over the fire, shared a little whiskey, and watched the snow glow blue under the moonlight. It was their first Christmas together, far from any church or town, but it was the warmest either of them had ever known. When midnight came, Luke took her hands and said simply, "You saved me, Clara. Before you came, I was just breathing. Now I'm living," she smiled through tears. "And you gave me a home." "I came here thinking I was nobody's wife, nobody's future. But with you, I finally found where I belong." They held each other until the fire died low, the cabin wrapped in peace so pure that for a moment, the whole world seemed still. But peace never lasted long on the frontier. Late one night, just after New Year's, the dogs began barking. Luke shot upright in bed, instincts flaring. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, heart pounding. Through the pale moonlight, he saw movement. A rider, slow and deliberate, making his way toward the cabin. Clara stood behind him, clutching her shawl. "Luke," she whispered. He didn't answer. He recognized the silhouette, the broad shoulders, the tilted hat. "Jonas Hale." "Stay inside," Luke said firmly, loading a cartridge. "Don't move unless I say." He stepped out onto the porch, the snow crunching under his boots. The cold bit into his skin, but his mind was steady. Jonas stopped 20 paces away, his horse snorting steam into the air. "Evening, Carson," he called, voice hoarse but steady. "Heard you had yourself a Merry Christmas." Luke's voice was flat. "You come here to die in the snow, Hale?" Jonas chuckled darkly. "No, just to take back what's mine." "There's nothing here for you." Jonas dismounted, his boots sinking deep into the snow. "We'll see about that." Luke raised the rifle, but Jonas didn't flinch. He stepped closer, eyes burning like coals.
"You think you can steal my woman and sleep easy?"
"You're a fool, Carson. She was mine first." Luke's jaw tightened. "She was never yours. You gave her up when you left her to die." For a long moment, neither man moved. Snow drifted between them, the world holding its breath again. Then Jonas reached for his gun. The crack of gunfire split the night. Once, twice, echoing across the frozen plains. When the smoke cleared, Jonas Hale lay face down in the snow, his pistol fallen from his grasp. Luke stood over him, chest heaving, the rifle still warm in his hands. His shot had been true, not out of rage, but out of necessity. A man defending his home, his love, his future. Clara ran out, her bare feet crunching in the snow, eyes wide with fear and relief. Luke caught her before she could fall. "It's over," he said softly, voice trembling. "It's over, Clara." Tears streamed down her face as she clung to him. "You did what you had to do." He looked toward the still form lying in the snow and nodded slowly. "I know, but I still wish it hadn't come to this." By morning, the snow had covered all trace of what had happened. Luke buried Jonas near the ridge under a lone pine tree. No marker, no words, just a silent prayer for a man who had lost his way. When he returned to the cabin, Clara was waiting for him by the fire. He took her hand, rough and cold, and said quietly, "The past won't trouble us no more." She squeezed his fingers. "Then let's build something new, Luke, for us, for the life we almost lost." He smiled faintly, pulling her close. "We already started, darling." Outside, the snow fell softer now, not as a threat, but as a blessing. Inside the cabin, the fire burned bright, and two hearts tested by storm and fear beat steady in the warmth of love that had survived it all. Winter loosened its grip slowly, as though the land itself were waking from a long, hard dream. The snow melted first along the creek where the water ran clear again, whispering to the cottonwoods that it was time to live. Then came the thawing of the earth, the smell of mud, of damp pine, of grass waiting to be born. For Luke Carson and Clara Whitmore, spring was more than just another season. It was a promise of life, of healing, and of a future they'd fought to keep. The cabin, which had weathered so much wind and snow, stood sturdy beneath the wide western sky. Smoke rose from its chimney, and the sound of a woman humming could be heard from inside. Clara was at the table kneading dough, her sleeves rolled up, the morning light turning her hair to gold. Luke leaned in the doorway, watching her with a quiet smile. "Never thought I'd see the day this old place smelled like bread instead of saddle oil," he said, half teasing. Clara looked up, smiling. "Then I suppose it's finally a home." He walked over, slid his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "Reckon it's been one ever since you came through that door." She laughed softly. "Even when I was scared and half frozen?" "Even then," he said, kissing her cheek. The warmth between them came easily now. Not the uncertain tenderness of strangers, but the deep, quiet bond of two souls who had endured hardship together and come out stronger for it. The long, brutal winter had tested them in every way, and they'd learned what kind of people they truly were. Clara had proven her strength, not through defiance, but through grace. Luke, hardened by years of loneliness, had discovered that love wasn't weakness at all. It was courage. It was what gave a man reason to fight, to live, to build. As the days grew longer, they turned their attention to the land. The ground was soft again, ready to be worked. Luke showed Clara how to hitch the mule, how to till the soil, how to plant corn and beans. She laughed when the plow caught a rock and he swore under his breath, teasing him that even the earth had its stubborn streak. "Maybe she's just testing you," she said with a grin. "Wouldn't be the first female to do that," he replied, winking at her. Their laughter carried across the open field, mingling with the birdsong and the steady rhythm of work. By the time the sun set, their faces were streaked with dirt and sweat, but their hearts were light. It wasn't easy work. Nothing in the frontier ever was. But it was honest, and it was theirs. That night after supper, Luke stepped out to the porch. The stars were sharp and bright, and the air smelled of thawing pine. Clara joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. They stood in silence for a while. The world spread out before them, endless plains, whispering winds, and the faint shimmer of moonlight on the creek. "I never thought I'd belong anywhere," she said softly. "Back east I was always too plain, too quiet, too ordinary. Out here everything feels different." "Even I feel different," Luke turned to her, his voice gentle. "You ain't ordinary, Clara. You've got more courage than most men I know. You came across 1,000 miles of dust and desert just to start over. That takes guts," she smiled faintly. "And a bit of foolishness." "Maybe," he said, grinning. "But sometimes a little foolishness is the start of something real." They sat together until the chill drove them back inside. As the fire burned low, Clara reached for his hand. "Do you ever think about him?" she asked quietly. Luke knew who she meant. Jonas Hale, the ghost of the man who had nearly destroyed them both. He nodded once. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Mostly to remind myself how easy it is to lose your way out here. But I also think, maybe in some strange way he led you to me." Clara looked at him, eyes shining in the firelight. "Maybe he did," she said. "Sometimes God uses broken roads to take us where we're meant to be." By early May, the land was alive again. Wildflowers painted the prairie in colors that glowed beneath the sun: purple lupine, yellow primrose, red paintbrush. The cabin's small garden flourished, and Clara often sang as she worked among the rows, her voice carrying sweet and clear across the valley. Luke would pause his chores just to listen. He couldn't have put it into words, but something about that sound, her singing, the wind through the grass, the creak of the old barn, made him feel that the frontier wasn't just a place for men to survive, but a place where hearts could belong, their lives settled into a gentle rhythm. Each morning Luke rode out to tend the cattle, and each evening he came home to the smell of supper and the sight of Clara waiting by the porch. On Sundays they rode to the small settlement 10 miles east, where a traveling preacher held services in a schoolhouse. People there soon came to know them as the Carsons, though no official vows had yet been spoken. One Sunday after the sermon, the preacher, a kindly man named Reverend Cole, pulled Luke aside. "Son," he said with a twinkle in his eye, "you've been bringing that fine lady of yours here near half a year now. Folks are starting to talk. Maybe it's time to make it proper. Luke chuckled awkwardly. Reckon you're right, Reverend. I just wanted to wait till it felt right. Cole clapped him on the shoulder. Seems to me it's been right for a while. When they rode home that afternoon, Clara noticed Luke's silence. You're awful quiet, she teased. He smiled a little. Just thinking about how maybe we ought to make things official. She blinked in surprise, then smiled softly. You mean? He took her hand in his, reins held loosely in the other. I mean, I'd be proud if you'd be my wife, Clara. I ain't got much to offer but this land, this cabin, and my word. But they're yours if you'll have 'em. Tears welled in her eyes. You already gave me everything that matters, Luke, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Their wedding was simple, like everything else in their lives. Reverend Cole rode out to the cabin a week later, and the ceremony took place beneath the cottonwood by the creek, with only the wind, the birds, and a pair of curious horses as witnesses. Clara wore a plain white dress she had sewn herself, and Luke, nervous as a boy, had even trimmed his hair and polished his boots. When the preacher said, You may kiss the bride, Luke did so gently, a man who understood what that moment truly meant. Clara smiled through her tears, her hands trembling slightly as they clasped his. We've both walked through storms to get here, she said softly. Now maybe we can rest. Rest, he echoed, glancing toward the land that stretched endless and free. And build. After Reverend Cole rode off, they stood together watching the sunset spill across the sky, the clouds glowing pink and gold. Clara rested her head on Luke's shoulder. This place, she said, it feels like it's finally ours. Luke nodded. Always was, he said. Just needed the right heart to fill it. That summer, the Carson homestead became something more than a cabin in the wild. It became a symbol of endurance, of faith rewarded. Travelers passing through the valley often stopped by for water or a meal, and Clara would greet them kindly, while Luke helped repair wagons or share supplies. Folks began to call it Carson's Crossing, a resting place for the weary. Years later, when people spoke of Luke and Clara Carson, they told the story of a cowboy who took in a stranger, an abandoned mail-order bride, and how, through hardship and kindness, they built a life stronger than the frontier itself. But to Luke and Clara, it wasn't a legend. It was simply their truth. Two broken souls who found each other in the wilderness, who turned loneliness into love, and a cabin into a home. On quiet evenings, long after the sun dipped behind the hills, Luke would sit on the porch, Clara beside him, their hands intertwined. The wind would rustle the grass, the stars would shimmer above, and he would murmur, You remember the day I found you in that old barn? She'd smile. How could I forget? Never knew then, he'd say softly, that you were the best thing that had ever ride into my life. And she would lean against him, eyes on the stars, and whisper, Maybe God just knew what we both needed, long before we did. The night would grow quiet, and the world would seem right again. The sound of the creek, the warmth of the firelight spilling from the cabin, and the steady heartbeat of the man and woman who had built their love out of dust, danger, and the endless grace of a new beginning.